This is another pretty long chapter, so we'll just read a portion of this here, but we'll make our way through it. It's a little bit of a longer lesson, but I don't think it's going to take us a long time to get through it. There's just kind of a lot that happens in chapter 2 here. So chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments, and his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself." Now, and he says that the Lord may continue his word, which he spake concerning me, saying, "If thy children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail thee," said he, "a man on the throne of Israel. Moreover, thou knowest also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the two captains of the host of Israel, unto Abner the son of Ner, and unto Amasa the son of Jether, whom he slew, and shed the blood of war in peace, and put the blood of war upon his girdle that was about his loins, and his shoes that were on his feet. Do therefore according to thy wisdom, and let not his whorehead go down to the grave in peace. But show kindness unto the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be of those that eat at thy table. For so they came to me when I fled because of Absalom thy brother. And behold, thou hast with thee Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite of Bahurim, which cursed me with a grievous curse in the day when I went to Mahanaim. But he came down to meet me at Jordan, and I swear to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put thee to death with the sword. Now therefore hold him not guiltless, for thou art a wise man, and knowest what thou oughtest to do unto him, but his whorehead bring down to the grave with blood. And so David slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron, and 33 years reigned he in Jerusalem. And then sat Solomon upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was greatly established. So we'll pause there just for a little bit. And so as we looked at chapter 1, chapter 1 begged the question, who is going to take over the kingdom? That was answered for us in chapter 1. Obviously, we saw Adonijah attempt to take over the kingdom, and we saw how David solidified Solomon and made sure that the nation knew that Solomon was going to be the king. And so that was the question of chapter 1. So the question of chapter 2 then is, how will this new kingdom be secure? And we'll see, that'll make a whole lot more sense as we get further into the chapter. But that's really the prevailing question of chapter 2. And so in chapter 1, David made his last public proclamation. We saw that in the last chapter. And so here he makes his last, what you might say, private proclamation, his last words to Solomon. And so David knows he's going to soon die. He tells him, I'm about to go the way of all the earth, right? This is natural. This is what happens. And so he knows he's going to soon die. And he gives Solomon a twofold charge. And everything that he tells him is born out of these two truths. And so he says, first, show thyself a man. And secondly, keep the charge of the Lord thy God. These were basically the two rules of life, I guess you could say, that he was given to Solomon, essentially saying, if you want to be the best king you can be, here's how you do that, right? Don't show thyself a man. Don't exhibit cowardice. Don't be the kind of man that you wouldn't desire your sons to be, right? Be a man and keep the charge of the Lord. And so he needed to be strong, and most importantly, he needed to be obedient to the commandments of God. And David knows. I mean, we made our way all the way through 1st and 2nd Samuel. We've seen the story in the life of David. And so David knows both through knowledge and experience, because he's lived this, how important both of these things would be for Solomon to be a successful king. David knows, probably better than anybody, how important it would be for his son to be obedient and to be strong. If the kingdom that David was handing over to Solomon was to be anything, David knows fundamentally Solomon must do these two things. And you have to kind of consider, David put blood, sweat, and tears into this kingdom. David has fought wars for this kingdom. David has gone through a whole lot of heartache for this kingdom. And so it's not just that he wants a legacy. No, he desires peace for his people. He wants the nation of Israel to be strong. Obviously, he wants his son to be a good king. I mean, every man would want that for his son. But he also desires for Solomon to be a good king, because the more or the better King Solomon is, the better things will be for the nation of Israel. And so David desires both of these things. Obviously, he has feelings for both. He wants a good king just personally because it's a son, but he also wants the nation to be successful. And so he knows, again, most importantly, showing yourself a man, that was important. But most importantly, keeping the charge of the Lord thy God. And you can also see, and I didn't put this in here, but you can see just by the way David says this, the emphasis, or I guess I should say where he places the emphasis. And so verse 2, he says, be thou strong therefore, show thyself a man. But when he says, keep the charge of the Lord thy God, he says quite a bit about this. Keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. And so he really emphasizes the second portion of this, because again, David knows experientially how important this is. The worst moments of David's life were very clearly the direct result of disobedience. And that's true for all of us, but probably most of us don't have the ability to place our thumb on it as clearly as David did. Right? David had this sinful moment with Bathsheba. The prophet of God comes to him and tells him all about it, and tells him the repercussions of this. And so, like I said, David's lowest moments came from direct disobedience on the part of David. And so he understands how important this is. And so David's point then is clear. A secure and a lasting kingdom would not come by the will of man, but it would come through that man's obedience. Right? And this is always true. This is true for Christians today. If we want to, and I use this word loosely, but if we want to live successfully, and when I say successfully, I mean as a Christian. I don't mean successfully in the eyes of the world. I mean if we want to live godly lives, the way to do that is not by our will, but it's through our obedience. Okay? Our will at times is going to be sinful. Because it comes, nothing good comes out of the heart, right? We understand that. But our obedience will lead us. Our obedience will take us where we need to go. And this is evident in the life of Christ. I mean, the Bible talks about the obedience of Christ during his earthly ministry. And so if David wants Solomon to be successful, and he does, he knows that this is how it's going to be, by his obedience to the command of God. And so Solomon was incapable of making his kingdom sure. He can't do that on his own. He could desire it. He could hope it to be true. He could try and surround himself with the best people. But if God wasn't in it, it didn't matter. And so Solomon had to be obedient to the will of God. So Solomon was incapable, but God was most certainly capable. So therefore, the means by which Solomon's kingdom would last, it's not going to be through military might. It's not going to be through strategic political alliances. It would be through covenant fidelity. And I want to add to this, it's not that military might and political strategy are wrong. He wasn't saying, Solomon, just sit back and don't do anything. That's not what he's saying. But be obedient in everything you do. Don't make political alliances that would lead you against the commandment of God. Don't do things militarily that would lead you against the commandment of God. And so everything has to be done through the lens of obedience. Del Ralph Davis, he said, what is true on the personal level holds also for the people of God as a corporate body. Kingdom stability is not anchored in our experiences or profession, nor in our education or pedigree, nor in our ministerial achievements, but only in obedience to the clear word we have long possessed. And so again, what reigns true for Solomon, even in his seat as king, reigns true for us even still today as Christians. And so David ends his message with instructions for Solomon. And this is where kind of the rest of the chapter comes from, is the bearing out of these commandments. And so the first thing he tells them, he gives them instructions for executions. He gives them instructions for blessing, interestingly enough. And so he tells them both Joab and Shimei, both of these men are to be executed in some way. And I want to add, he doesn't necessarily say you must do this immediately. With both of these men, in fact, we'll just see it. With both of these men, you see verse 6, for instance, with Joab. At the end of verse 6, it says, let not his whorehead go down to the grave in peace. And then he says it again with Shimei at the end of verse 9. That term there, whore, H-O-A-R, it refers to an old or gray, an older man, essentially, don't let him just die naturally. That's essentially what David is saying. He must be executed. This must be punishment placed upon these two men. Now Joab, he says Joab needs to be executed for his murder of Abner and Amasa. We saw both of those in 2 Samuel. Now the obvious question with Joab is, why does David do this now? David has had ample opportunity to do this with Joab himself. And so this is an instance where, and we don't know exactly why. I'm just making some inferences here. David showed Joab mercy in this, but the question is why? Some people suggest that David was just afraid of Joab. I don't think that's the case. You see all the things that David faced in his life. Joab was most certainly a competent man, competent militarily. All the things that he did, I understand that. But I wouldn't say that Joab would have been the most fearful or even strong man that David ever faced in his life. I don't think that David was necessarily afraid of Joab. Personally, I think it could have been that he just saw Joab as too resourceful. We've talked about this throughout, particularly 2 Samuel. You might not have liked the way that Joab did things, but there was no question if you had something to do, Joab would get it done. And so that's kind of if you are running a kingdom, that might be the kind of guy you keep around. I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying David should have kept him around, but I'm saying I think that's probably why David relegates the judgment of Joab to his son, and why he didn't do it himself. But nevertheless, for one reason or another, David doesn't do it, and he tells Solomon, for justice sake, Joab can't just have a peaceful death, a natural death. He must be judged. And then Shimei, he says, do this for the cursing of David. Now, this one makes a little bit more sense. Just to kind of go into the history of this a little bit, when Absalom was rebelling against David and had stolen the hearts of the kingdom, David was on the run. And as David was on the run one time, this man Shimei comes out and just starts cursing David and just throwing out these curses upon David, upon his house, upon his family. And then eventually, after the Absalom's rebellion was stamped out and David was coming back to be king again, Shimei comes to David and basically says, oh, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done these things. And we talked about at the time how Shimei was a man of opportunity. When it seemed as if Absalom was going to be successful, Shimei goes out there and he curses David. Why? Because he doesn't think David's going to win. He doesn't think David's ever going to be in a position of power again. Well, as soon as it was clear that David was going to win and he was going to get the throne back, well, now he goes and throws himself at the mercy of David. And so Shimei was not an honorable man by any measure, but what happened is David made certain promises to Shimei. Well, because you're obeisant, because you're seemingly repentant, right, I'm not going to kill you and all that. And so David kind of had his own word to stop him from executing Shimei, but Solomon's not bound by that. And so he tells Solomon that he needs to do it. And then on the other side of this, the sons of Barzillai, David says these men are to be blessed. Now, we haven't actually met them. We have met Barzillai. And so, again, during the rebellion of Absalom, at one particular point, a couple of different individuals come to David and bring provisions and bring things to bless David and his army. Barzillai was one of those, and so it seems as if David, or rather Barzillai's sons, were there with him during that particular time, based upon what David said, because he said that they came and blessed me when during Absalom's time. Now, the text doesn't tell us they were there, but it seems by David's words here that they were there. And so he wants them to be blessed as a result of this. Now, all in all, David wants Solomon to eliminate threats, and he wants him to bless those who have blessed him. That's what he's asking Solomon to do. And so the rest of the chapter then is Solomon doing this. That's what the rest of the chapter is going to show us. Now, after this, as we read earlier, David dies. And it's almost, interestingly enough, we might think the author of 1 Kings would spend a little bit more time on this, would give some kind of a eulogy or something, but he doesn't. David dies and we're moving on to Solomon. And so I won't spend much time here either, but we understand that with the death of David ended the greatest era of Israel's history. Israel was never better, was never greater than they were under David. Now, we'll talk about this, I'm sure. They had technically a bigger nation under Solomon. Solomon had a little bit more area of control than David did. But we would not say that they were greater under Solomon than they were under David. And all of that really stems from the fact that David did what he told Solomon to do. David was strong. He acted himself a man, but he also, again, more importantly, followed the commands of God. Again, when I say that, I don't mean that he always did that. I don't mean that David was a perfect man. We know that. But generally speaking, there is a reason why the Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. And so David, because of his relationship with God, God blessed David, and through David the nation. And so one of the reasons Solomon's reign will be as great as it was, not as great as David's, but it's still good. One of the reasons why it will be that way is because of the great foundation he received from David. Because of what David did, Solomon received a pretty good, strong nation. And so this was one of the reasons why Solomon was going to be able to have the reign that he did. And so the text then tells us, then sat Solomon upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was established greatly. It was established mainly because of the life and the things that David did. And so let's pick it up. I think we stopped at verse 13. So verse 13, it says, and Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and she said, comest thou peaceably? And he said, peaceably. And he said, moreover, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And she said, say on. And he said, thou knowest that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel their faces on me, or set their faces on me, that I should reign. Howbeit, the kingdom is turned about and has become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And so at least he's acknowledging that. And so verse 16 says, and now I ask one petition of thee, deny me not. And she said unto him, say on. And he said, speak, I pray thee, unto Solomon the king, for he will not say nay to thee, that he give me Abishag the Shunammite to wife. And Bathsheba said, well, I will speak for thee unto the king. And so verse 19 says, Bathsheba therefore went unto the king Solomon to speak unto him for Adonijah. And the king rose up to meet her, and he bowed himself unto her, and sat down on his throne, and caused the seat to be set for the king's mother. And she sat on his right hand. And then she said, I desire one small petition of thee. I pray thee, say me not nay. And the king said unto her, ask on, my mother, for I will not say thee nay. And she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah thy brother to wife. And then verse 22 shows us, he says, the king Solomon answered, and he said unto his mother, and why dost thou ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also, for he is mine elder brother, even for him and for Abiathar the priest, and for Joab the son of Zeruiah. And then King Solomon sware by the Lord, saying, God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah have not spoken this word against his own life. Now therefore, as the Lord liveth, which hath established me, and set me on the throne of David my father, and who hath made me an house, as he has promised, Adonijah shall be put to death this day. And King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him that he died. So we'll stop right here. So we're going to look at these individual stories as we go. And so first of all, we see here Adonijah. And so now that Solomon was king, Adonijah desires something from him. And so like I mentioned earlier, it is good that Adonijah acknowledges the reason Solomon is king is because he says it was his at the end of verse 15, for it was his from the Lord. And so at the very minimum, Adonijah acknowledges that's why he's king. However, what he does, I think, exposes something from Solomon. Now, there is some cultural things at play here. I understand that. But Adonijah wants something from Solomon, and he knows if I want something from him, the way to get that is not to go to him, it's to go through his mother. And so, in fact, he even says this. He says, I'm going to ask this of you, because if you tell him to do it, Solomon's not going to tell you no. And then eventually, when Bathsheba does come to Solomon, he agrees with that. He says, ask. I'm not going to tell you no. And so it seems, at the very least, as if Solomon had unhealthy might be too strong a word, but maybe not the best relationship with his mother. It seemed like they were, Bathsheba had a hold on Solomon that was maybe not the best thing. And so there's a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this. Why did Bathsheba agree to this in the first place? And I saw people all over the spectrum on this. Some people said, well, she only did it because she knew that Solomon was going to kill Adonijah if he actually asked for this. But we're not told that in the Scriptures. We're not told any of that. And so for all we know, Adonijah comes, asks this of Bathsheba. Bathsheba agrees, asks Solomon, and Solomon gets really angry about it. We'll talk about why he's angry. And so he desires to have Abishag. Now, if you remember, Abishag was the young woman given to David in chapter 1 that basically acted as his nurse. David wasn't able to keep any body heat, and so she would lay with David, not in a sexual manner, but she would lay with David, and they would have body heat, and it was just a means to keep David alive, essentially. But given Eastern practices, at this particular time and in these cultures, by doing so, she would have then been considered a part of David's harem. By doing this, basically, you are now a concubine of David. This is something that we have talked about several times in 1st and 2nd Samuel. The concubine of the king oftentimes, maybe not every time, but oftentimes was given to the next king. And that was kind of seen as a line of succession. And so to be with the king, the former king's concubines, was a way to stake your claim to the throne. This is why when Absalom, again, to go back to him, when he rebels against David, one of the things his counselor says, you need to do this. You need to go take David's concubines, put a tent on the palace, and go in and be with David's concubines. They say, you do that, and everybody in the nation will know what's happening. Solomon does that. Why does he do that? Because to be with the king's concubines is to be, to show that you're trying to be the next king. And so most people believe, and I think that there's probably something to this. Again, we have to infer this because the Bible doesn't tell us this. But Adonijah seems to be making one kind of last-ditch effort to gain the throne. And so whether or not he thought Solomon would be dull enough to go along with this, I don't know. But there's a reason why he goes through Bathsheba and not Solomon. And so he goes to Bathsheba and says, I want Abishag. Bathsheba comes to Solomon, says he wants Abishag. And so Solomon responds, again, if you don't understand why, perhaps surprisingly, really severely. And he says, why dost thou ask Abishag the Shunammite? Ask for him the kingdom also? Are you just trying to hand him the throne? That's what Solomon's basically saying. And so Carl Cal, again, just to kind of give you the history of what I just said, he said, although Abishag had only been David's nurse, in the eyes of the people she passed as his concubine, and among the Israelites, just as with the ancient Persians, taking possession of the harem of a deceased king was equivalent to an establishment of the claim to the throne. So that's what's taking place here. So it is certainly possible that Adonijah's request was completely innocent. That's possible given what we read in the text, because the text doesn't tell us this is why Adonijah wanted to marry her. We are told in chapter 1 that she was a beautiful woman. It very well could be as simple as Adonijah saw her, she's beautiful, I want her to be my wife. It could be that simple. However, given his position, given his history, given the fact that he tries to do this kind of in a backdoor way, going through Bathsheba, it certainly seems as if the Bible is telling us that Adonijah was making another run for the throne. And so Solomon had told Adonijah in chapter 1, after everything was over, he lets Adonijah live. But he tells Adonijah, if wickedness shall be found in him, he shall die. And so he told Adonijah, I'm not going to kill you, but you have to live as a worthy man. Right? If you show anything that you're trying to be sneaky again, I'm not going to put up with it. And so it seems like Solomon was totally just and in keeping with his word. It says he sent by the hand of Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him that he died. And so this was, I guess you could say, threat one. Threat one is now eliminated. And so verse 26, it says, and unto Abiathar the priest said the king, get thee to Anathoth unto thine own fields, for thou art worthy of death. But I will not at this time put thee to death, because thou bearest the ark of the Lord God before David my father, because thou hast been afflicted in all wherein my father was afflicted. And so Solomon thrust out Abiathar from being priest unto the Lord, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord which he spake concerning the house of Eli and Shiloh. And so a couple of things here. Again, back to chapter 1, Abiathar had thrown his loyalties to Adonijah. Abiathar did not stay with Solomon. And so Solomon obviously desired a high priest who was loyal to him and not taking place in rebellions against him. We talked about in chapter 1 that Abiathar and Zadok, both of these men kind of was serving at that time as kind of a co-high priest position. Now, the Bible never calls them that, but that's essentially what was taking place. And so, to me, that's just the best way to explain it. And so Solomon comes to Abiathar and he says, listen, you deserve to die. You threw your allegiances behind the man whom God did not choose. In other words, you are a priest. You are, again, co-high priest, essentially, at this particular point. and actively went against the will of God, right? And so you deserve to die, but because you have been loyal to my father, not me necessarily, but because you've been loyal to my father, because you have faithfully done the work of a priest, I'm not going to kill you. And so, again, during the time of Absalom, Abiathar was loyal to David. He didn't go with Absalom. And so Abiathar had done things that were very worthy in his life. And so because of all of this, Solomon just showed him a great deal of mercy. However, all of this was already foretold. And so at the end of verse 27, and so I don't know if I mentioned it, but Solomon removes him from priesthood, essentially what he does. And so at the end of verse 27, it says that this was done that he might fulfill the word of the Lord which he spake concerning the house of Eli. And so way back at the beginning of 1 Samuel, Eli was the high priest. His sons were terribly wicked people, and Eli essentially let them do whatever they want and didn't try to stop it. And they were perverting the nation. They were turning the nation away from God. And Eli was mostly a godly man, but when it came to his sons, he kind of refused to punish them. He just let them do whatever they want. And so because of this, God put a prophecy upon Eli's house, and he said, your house is going to be done. You will not be priests anymore in Israel. And so Abiathar is the last remaining descendant of Eli. And so as soon as Solomon comes in and removes him from being a priest, now that prophecy has been completely fulfilled that God gave Eli at the very beginning of 1 Samuel. And so we move, so again, threat 2 eliminated. And so we moved into Joab. So verse 28, it says, Then tidings came to Joab, for Joab had turned after Adonijah, though he turned not after Absalom. And Joab fled into the tabernacle of the Lord, and he caught hold on the horns of the altar. And it was told King Solomon that Joab was fled into the tabernacle of the Lord, and behold, he is by the altar. And then Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, saying, Go, fall upon him. And Benaiah came to the tabernacle of the Lord, and he said unto him, Thus saith the king, Come forth. And he said, Nay, but I will die here. And Benaiah brought the king word again, saying, Thus said Joab, and thus he answered me. And the king said unto him, Do as he hath said, and fall upon him, and bury him, that thou mayest take away the innocent blood which Joab shed from me, and from the house of my father. And the Lord shall return his blood upon his own head, who fell upon these 2 men more righteous and better than he, and slew them with the sword. My father David not knowing thereof to wit, Abner the son of Ner, the captain of the host of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, captain of the host of Judah. Their blood shall therefore return upon the head of Joab, and upon the head of his seed forever. But upon David, and upon his seed, and upon his house, and upon his throne, shall there be peace forever from the Lord. And so Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up, and he fell upon him, and he slew him. And he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. And it says, And then the king put Benaiah the son of Jehoiada in his room over the host, and Zadok the priest did the king put in the room of Abiathar. Well, again, we'll pause here for just a moment. And so Joab, he was in, an awkward position. Most likely, Joab would have continued his position had he not tried to throw his support behind Adonijah. That's my assumption, at least. And so now that Solomon was king, Joab knows he's in trouble. When Absalom rebelled, he went with David. Joab was a lot of things. Joab was fiercely loyal to David. Apparently, that loyalty did not return to his son Solomon. It went to Adonijah. I don't know if there was a personal relationship between Joab and Adonijah before, if they were friends or whatever the case may be. But for whatever reason, Joab decides not to support Solomon. And so Joab knows he's kind of in trouble here. Now, probably, I don't even think probably. I think we can assume quite readily, Joab isn't even thinking about Amasa. He isn't even thinking about the men that he murdered. He isn't thinking about these other men at all. It says in verse 28, Then tidings came to Joab, for Joab had turned after Adonijah. That's his only fear. The fact that he murdered those 2 guys are so far behind him, he doesn't even care. No, in his mind, he's thinking, Solomon's mad because I supported Adonijah. Now, there's probably something to that, but that's not why justice comes to Joab. And so he does what Adonijah did in chapter 1. If you remember Adonijah, he runs and he grabs onto the horns of the altar, and that's exactly what Joab did. And we talked about how that was kind of seen as a place of refuge. And that's true. It was a place of refuge. However, not for men who did the kinds of things that Joab did. Okay, I'll explain. And so Solomon sends out Benaiah to deal with Joab as he had done with Adonijah. But Joab just refuses. He won't leave the altar. And as we talked about, you didn't want to kill somebody there at the altar. It was kind of, that would defile the altar. You didn't want to do that. And so Benaiah tells the king, and then Solomon responds, says, "Do as he hath said, and fall upon him. Bury him, that thou mayest take away the innocent blood which Joab shed from me and from the house of my father." And so the refuge that was given at the altar was for those who had committed manslaughter, not murder. And so if you had accidentally killed somebody, right, you could go to the altar, you could hold on to the horns until basically the situation could be explained. Perhaps there were witnesses, whatever the case may be. You could gain your innocence by doing this. Joab's not innocent. We know Joab's not innocent. Everybody knows that Joab is not innocent. Now, just as a quick note, where does he say it? In verse 32, Solomon said that he slew them with the sword in the middle. He said, "My father David not knowing thereof." Now, what he means by that, and we're told this in 2 Samuel, when Joab killed these two men, David didn't know. David did not send Joab to go do it. In fact, both chapters, when both men are killed, it goes through great pains to show us that David didn't know. This was under no commandment of David. Joab does this under his own compulsion. And so this is what he means. Now, obviously, David found out. It's just saying that when they happened, David was unaware of it. And so Joab is not going to be given refuge. The altar will not protect the guilty. And so Joab is fundamentally guilty. And so Solomon says a couple of times, the justice brought to Joab would clear the blood guilt from David's family, which is interesting that Solomon is saying at this point, basically God is holding our family guilty, even though Joab is doing. Why? Because David knew and didn't do anything about it. That's why. David found out. We don't know how long it was afterwards that he found out. I would assume not that long. David probably found out pretty quickly. And yet, he relegates the justice to his son instead of doing it himself. And so Solomon says now the guilt will return to Joab and his family. And so Benaiah, then, he sends Benaiah. Benaiah kills him. And interestingly enough, Solomon allows Joab a proper burial. And I found that fascinating, which, again, my assumption is this is a sign of respect for the life of service that Joab gave to David. Again, Joab was a lot of things, but Joab was very, very loyal to David. We've seen that over and over again. And then Benaiah and Zadok were both given their new roles in the way I worded it, recently vacated positions. They were vacated because Benaiah killed both of them, but they were vacated, and so Benaiah and Zadok take place in those roles. So Benaiah is now the kind of, you say, military commander. Zadok is the singular high priest. And then lastly, there's Shimei. And so we see verse 36. And the king sent and called for Shimei, and he said unto him, Build thee an house in Jerusalem, and dwell there, and go not forth thence any whither. For it shall be that on the day that thou goest out and passest over the brook Kidron, that thou shalt know for certain that thou shalt surely die. Thy blood shall be upon thine own head. And Shimei said unto the king, The saying is good. As my lord the king has said, so will I the servant do. And Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. And it came to pass at the end of 3 years that two of the servants of Shimei ran away unto Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath. And they told Shimei, saying, Behold, thy servants be in Gath. And Shimei arose and saddled his ass and went to Gath to Achish to seek his servants. And Shimei went and brought his servants from Gath. And it was told Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and was come again. And the king sent and called for Shimei, and he said unto him, Did I not make thee to swear by the Lord, and protested unto thee, saying, Know for certain, on the day that thou goest out, and walkest abroad any whither, that thou shalt surely die. And thou sayest unto me, The word that I have heard is good. He says, Why then hast thou not kept the oath of the Lord, and the commandment that I have charged thee with? And the king said moreover unto Shimei, Thou knowest all the wickedness which thine heart is privy to, that thou didst to David my father. Therefore the Lord shall return thy wickedness upon thine own head. And King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established forever, shall be established before the Lord forever. And so the king commended Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, which went out and fell upon him that he died. And the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. And so I already mentioned this, but David told him, His hoar head bring thou down to the grave with blood, right? Don't let him die a natural death. He must face judgment. It doesn't necessarily have to be now. Well, David had also told Solomon all that Shimei had done. Shimei was a crafty person, essentially, you could say. He was a weasel. And so basically what Solomon does is he says, You build a house here in Jerusalem. Why? So I can keep tabs on you. That's why, right? So I don't want you out of my sight. And he agrees to this. Shimei says, this is good, right? I will do this. And then, of course, 3 years later, he has some servants leave, which shows us he had a good deal of freedom. He wasn't by any means in prison. Shimei had these servants. They ran away, possibly to suggest, he wasn't treating them right. I don't think Shimei was a good person by any means. He goes to get them, brings them back. Solomon finds out about this, and he brings them in and he says this. He reveals, did I not make thee to swear by the Lord? Now, we weren't told that the first time. But now he says to Shimei, remember what happened. You swore by the Lord. And so Shimei didn't just break a promise to the king. He broke the commandment of God. And that's the biggest issue here. And so therefore, Solomon says, the Lord shall return thy wickedness upon thine own head. And King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. Why? Because this isn't just a personal issue. This isn't just because you did something to Dad, and now you've broken a command or a promise from me. No. You went against God's commandment. Right? And so, therefore, not only will you have just punishment, but I will be blessed for this because I'm carrying out the will of God. And so, Benaiah, again, was sent out and fulfilled the commandment of the king, killed Shimei, another threat eliminated. Now, I want to close with this. All of this does kind of seem foreign to us. Governments, what we might call, just democratic governments, whatever, term you want to use, they don't, at least outwardly, operate this way. I'll put it that way. I'm not saying that they don't operate this way, but at least outwardly they don't operate this way. They don't make it known that they're eliminating their threats. I still think they eliminate their threats, by the way. I just don't think they make it known. And so not like Solomon's doing here. And so we read things like this, and perhaps to our Western mindset, we think, well, this is horrible. Solomon, he's not acting righteously. But we're not allowed to think that based upon what the Bible tells us. And the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. Who's doing the establishing? God's doing it. God established Solomon's kingdom. God established Solomon's throne. And so if his kingdom is established, again, as we talked about earlier, it has nothing to do with the will of Solomon. It has everything to do with the will of God. And so we read an interesting thing in the book of Matthew. And so in Matthew chapter 13, and I just wrote it out for you here in the lesson, it says, so shall it be in the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. They shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of the Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And so what Solomon does here, interestingly enough, is a small picture of what Christ will do when he comes to establish his earthly kingdom. He's going to gather out all the wicked, and he's going to put them to death. And so I'll close again with a quote from Dale Ralph Davis. He says, the security of the kingdom requires the elimination of its enemies. The kingdom must be preserved from those trying to destroy and undermine it. 1 Kings 2 shares the same kingdom theology with the rest of Scripture. That's why 1 Kings 2 is such a searching text. The final Davidic king will follow the same principle in finally establishing his kingdom. My only safety, and this is why I put this in here, my only safety then is in submitting to the monarchy of Jesus. Where was the safety found at this particular point? I'm not talking about another point, but at this particular point, where was the safety found if you were an Israelite? Being loyal to the king. That's where your safety was found. If you were loyal to the king, you didn't have anything to worry about. When you were disloyal to the king, when you were disobedient to the king, at this particular point in Solomon's reign, you had some stuff to worry about. And so he says this is what's pointing us towards Christ. When it comes to Christ's kingdom, what do we need to do? We need to be loyal to the king. And so we have some parallels here between what Solomon did, even though we come at this with different perspectives. Right? And this is something you always need to do, particularly in the Old Testament, but with the whole Bible. We need to come with this and say, I understand I'm a 21st century Western Christian with 21st century Western principles and a mindset and a worldview, and not to interject that into the text and say, well, Solomon, everything you did here was sinful. Everything you did here was wrong. Why? Because if Donald Trump, took the presidency and then just sent out, Pete Hegseth and just said, just line them up. Everybody who didn't vote for me, just start eliminating them, right? We would object to that. And so we would say if we think Donald Trump would be sinful for doing it, Solomon was sinful for doing it. It's not the same time. It's not the same people. It's not the same culture. It's not the same kingdom. It's a whole different system. It's a whole different government. And so we can't just say, because this is how things are now, that should be how they were done then. No, the Bible doesn't allow us that. And so we have to understand the culture of the time and everything that we're reading, and then beyond that to see that God was establishing this. This was God's doing. And so we understand that, it might offend our sensibilities. But, just to be frank, the Bible doesn't really care if it offends our sensibilities. And so this is how we have to understand this. And so, Solomon does things differently than how they might have been done today. But Solomon was doing what he needed to do. And again, I don't think Solomon by any means was a perfect man. I don't think he had a perfect kingdom. He did some very terrible things, particularly as he got older and, more involved in idolatry and those kinds of things. But at least here, I have to say, because the Bible tells me, he started well. He started well. And he started in a godly manner. So this is where we start the reign of Solomon. And as I mentioned last week, we don't get just a whole ton of information on it, not many chapters. But as we'll see over the next handful of chapters, we'll be looking at Solomon's reign and his kingdom. But let me pray, and we'll be dismissed this morning.